Okay, so great. Thank you, Jennifer. So good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to our second Transformation Fund Community of Practice. I'm Donna Linderman. I'm the Senior Vice Chancellor for Student Success in the System Office. And my office, along with Assistant Vice Chancellor Casey O'Brien and our colleagues from the Center for Professional Development, are supporting a community of practice for all campuses who are receiving funding through our Transformation Fund. This is our second community of practice that's focused on effective transfer partnerships. And we are delighted that this morning we have two national leaders here to talk about their work looking at community college to baccalaureate granting college transfer at the national level, building on many years of work that they have done. So I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Dr. Tania LaViolet from the Aspen Institute and Dr. Tatiana Velasco Rodriguez from the Community College Research Center, who have done groundbreaking work for many years looking at transfer across the country, where it's working, where it's not, and some incredible insights that I think can inform all of our work, and particularly your work at the campus level or at the system level, wherever you happen to be seated. So Tania and Tati are going to present, I'm going to let them share their screen. They're going to present highlights from their research, and then we will open it up for questions. I'd like to encourage everyone to stay on mute, but please log your questions in the chat as the presentation is going along. I'll be monitoring that with my colleague Jen Schneider from CPD. And then when Tania and Tati are finished, we will open it up to questions, which I'll moderate using raised hands. So I'm going to turn it over immediately to Tania and Tatiana.
Thank you, Donna, and everyone for having us. I am Tatiana Velasco. I am going to start, and then I'll pass it over to Tania, who will be sharing new evidence on this work. But I want to start by providing the national level picture that we were able to construct with the recent work that we conducted in collaboration with the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, which allowed us to track the trajectories of community college entrance from the fall 2015 cohort all the way 6 years after to see which students transfers and which students completed a bachelor's through transfer. But in general, what we know from previous research and surveys is that nationally, 80% of community college students aspire to earn a bachelor's degree. But when we look at the data, particularly our more recent data, but I'll show you that this is a trend that has been going on for a while, only a third of community college entrants are able to transfer, are effectively transferring to a four-year institution within 6 years from their enrollment. And only 16% of community college entrants are graduating with a bachelor's degree within 6 years from their college start. Next slide. And these numbers are low, and they have been low for a while. When we compare the national level transfer out rate and cohort bachelor completion rate, so the rate of community college entrants who transfer to a four-year institution, and we do that for multiple entry cohorts all the way back to 2007, what we see is that the transfer out rate and the bachelor completion rates have not changed over time. They basically have stayed on a 33% transfer out rate and a 14 to 16% bachelor completion rate. Next slide. And while there is variation across states in these transfer rates, and you can dig into that in our report and in the data dashboard that we put together with this report as well, what we do find is that there is no state where at least a quarter or a 25% of the community college entrants are completing a bachelor's degree within 6 years. Right here, you see the state of New York with a bachelor completion rate of 18%, and the state with the highest bachelor completion rate is New Jersey, but it's only at 21%. So these rates are really low across the board nationally. And one novelty that we were able to construct this time around with the National Student Clearinghouse data is examining transfer outcomes for specific subgroups of students, for students who have been historically underrepresented among bachelor's completers. So we focus on Black students, Hispanic students, Native American, low-income students, and students who we define as older adults, so students who are 25 years old or older by the time that they start their post-secondary education. And what we see here, you have in the light, the first bar is the national level metrics that I was discussing initially. But we replicate these metrics for these different subgroups. And what we see is that there are large disparities in the students who are able to transfer to a four-year institution. So the community college students who make the leap to a four-year institution. The students who, after transferring, are completing a bachelor's within 6 years. So this is the transfer out bachelor completion rate. So basically this metric focuses on the students who transfer. And we see that, for example, for Black students, the transfer out bachelor completion rate is as low as 16 percentage points. And in general, when we look at the bachelor completion rate of all these students, yes, the national level is 16%, but for these specific subgroups of students, the bachelor completion rate is much lower. Next slide. One thing about these metrics and the metrics that we've been looking and we refer to as like the previous cohorts metrics is that these metrics have been focusing on the students who are first time ever in college in these entry cohorts. But another novelty that we were able to measure with this data is transfer out and bachelor completion metrics for students who had some prior dual enrollment. So for students that we know before the fall of 2015 were enrolled at a community college or for your institution taking college level courses. And what we see is that these students with prior dual enrollment not only have higher transfer out rate and bachelor completion rates, but the disparities between groups are much smaller than what we saw for first time in college students. Now, these two groups of students are very different. As you may know, you probably do know, dual enrollment students tend to be a very selected group, but this combined with previous evidence on the causal effects of dual enrollment suggests that dual enrollment is really consequential in terms of the community college students' chances to transfer to a four-year institution and to complete a bachelor's degree. Next slide. So this is kind of like the high-level landscape in terms of transfer outcomes. But now, and one of the things that we were able to see in this, we were able to examine in this report and that I want to share now is what happens for different types of institutions and specifically for four-year institutions. And one of the advantages that this work gave us is that we are able to highlight the specific recommendations for different types of institutions. And overall, what we observe in the data is that community colleges and four-year institutions need to take action and really be owners or co-owners of their students' transfer success. So in the second report, in which we're focusing on the outcomes of community college transfers at four-year institutions, what we did is that we looked at all the students who started as community college transfer students at four-year institutions in the fall of 2015, and we measured two types of outcomes. First, the percentage of those students who continued enrolled at the four-year institution into a second year, so the transferring retention rate. And second, the rate of transfer students who were completing a bachelor's degree. And we did that for 3 different time windows: within 2 years after they transferred, within 4 years after they transferred, and within 6 years after they transferred. So bear in mind that this is not taking into account the time that went by while they were community college students. We're taking into account only the time after they transferred. And we see 2 things. First, community college transfers are highly motivated students. Their retention rate is very strong. It's 81% nationally. And when we compare that with the retention rate of non-transfer students, so the students who start fresh at at the four-year institution. We see that their retention rate is higher. However, their bachelor completion rate isn't as strong. So in the 2+2 ideal formula of transfer, in which you do 2 years at the community college and then 2 years at the four-year institution, you would expect that after 2 years of transferring, more students were completing their bachelor's. But what we see is that only 18% of community college transfers are completing a bachelor's after 2 years of their start at the four-year institution. When we give them more time to complete this degree, let's say 4 years or 6 years, we see that after 4 years, that rate increases to half of the community college transfers, which still low after 4 years. And when we give them 6 years after transferring, only 59% of community college transfers have completed their bachelor. So these are students, community college students, that are effectively looking to complete a bachelor's degree because they already transferred. They made the leap into the four-year institution. However, they're not completing, not even when we give them extra time to do so. And the disparities that we observe in these bachelor completion rates are high, especially for community college Black students and older adults. Next slide. One of the things about that we were able to examine and that is important to highlight in terms of the role of four-year institutions is that the type of four-year institutions that community college students are transferring to matters. So in here, I am comparing the transferring bachelor completion rate of all students within 4 years. So that's the 52% that I showed you earlier. And we measure that or examine how that bachelor completion rates look like for students who transfer to Hispanic serving institutions and ANAPCs. And nationally, what we observe is that students who transfer at these institutions do better on average in terms of their bachelor completion rate. And this is true across the different racial, socioeconomic, and age groups that we examined. Next slide. But when we examine other types of four-year institutions, specifically for-profit four-year institutions and predominantly online institutions, what we see is that students who transferred, community college students who transferred to these institutions have the weakest transferring bachelor completion rates. And the gap is very large, almost half for nationally, more than half nationally, and for the different student subgroups. So this really speaks to the importance of the institutions that are receiving these community college transfer students and highlights the relevance of considering which types of four-year institutions are receiving my community college students in the case of the community colleges. Another aspect that we were able to examine with this data, and that speaks about the pathway and different milestones that community college students could get and should get as they go through their transfer pathway, is the completion of a community college award prior to transferring. That is an associate's degree or a certificate. And when we examine the differences in the transferring bachelor completion rate for students who transferred with and without an award, we see very large differences in these rates. Students who transferred with a community college award have a completion rate of 67%, whereas students who didn't transfer with an award have a completion rate of 42%. Now, nationally, only 41% of community college transfers transferred with a prior award, and the large majority of these students, about 80% of these students earned an associate's degree. And there can be a lot of variation in terms of the type of associate's degree that these students earn. However, nationally, we do see this trend very stark across the different groups that we examine. And we think that this is sort of like pointing towards a direction of how important milestones at the community college can be and how consequential these milestones can be for the student transfer success. The last thing that I want to highlight today, before passing it over to Tania, is that while we are showing the national average differences across the nation and across the states, there is a lot of variation in terms of the transfer outcomes of different institutions overall and for the specific subgroups of students that they serve. And when we examine this variation across institutions, so these figures here, and I'm going to walk you over them in a second, but these figures here are basically showing the transfer out bachelor completion rate of each community college. So each community college is a dot. And we are comparing the transfer out, the bachelor completion rate for Black students at the institution, for example, relative to the bachelor completion rate of all the students at that institution. And when we were trying to examine here, and what we show here is at this shaded top right segment of the graphs, these are the institutions where the bachelor completion rate of their Black students relative to that of all the students that they serve are very similar, and they're both above the national average. Basically, these are institutions where these historically underrepresented students among bachelor's completers achieve similar bachelor completion rates as all the students at the institution. So there are little disparities in these bachelor completion rates, and these completion rates are above the national average. So this is suggesting these are institutions that are very likely to have figure out or like crack the code in quotes in terms of how to get their students, regardless of their background, to be able to transfer and complete a bachelor's. And so this has a lot to do not only with what happens at the community college, but also with the type of partnerships that they're able to construct with four-year institutions. And so with that in mind, I want to pass it over to Tania, who will be speaking about these types of partnerships in more detail.
Thank you, Tati. Hi, everyone. I'm Tania LaViolet. I'm Director of Research and Innovation at the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program. We use the data from the National Student Clearinghouse, much like that analysis that Tati just showed you, to identify partnerships that had both strong and equitable outcomes for Black, Hispanic, and low-income students. And we wanted to know what sets these schools and partnerships apart. And then we are going to publish our findings in a second edition of the Transfer Playbook, which is going to be coming to a website near you in fall 2024, October 2024 to be more specific. So the findings that I'm about to share with you today are still in draft form. We hope they will be informative, but what we're sharing today might look a little bit different when the final publication comes out. But we don't want to keep the findings to ourselves. We think they're really interesting, and we hope they'll help guide the work that you're doing. So just a little bit of context here. We identified, I think it was 258 partnerships with strong and equitable outcomes for Black, Hispanic, and low-income students. And then we identified within that a subset of 40 to 50 partnerships for screening. And then from that subset of institutions, we identified about 10 to 15 to do either virtual or in-person site visits. So altogether, we're talking about over 200 hours of qualitative research interviews that we're synthesizing here into the findings that we're about to share. And before I get into the emerging transfer playbook framework, I want to share some general observations that we had in the field work across those 200 hours of interviews that really helped guide our synthesis of the findings. And those observations are, first and foremost, place matters. A lot of Black, Hispanic, and low-income students were reliant on local community college and university partnerships in order to access a bachelor's degree. Yes, there are some students that are able and willing to travel further afield, but many of those students wanted to stay close to home. And so it's really critical for those students that those local partnerships be free and clear of barriers as much as possible. But unfortunately, what we found was that even when partnerships were close by to each other that enabled that kind of access, they didn't always put in the work to smoothen out the transfer student experience as much as possible. So there's so much opportunity and so much possibility within those existing regional or local partnerships to improve outcomes for students. Secondly, high stakes choices can't be left to chance. If you think about a transfer student experience and if everything went right, there are about 100 choices that a transfer student needs to make at minimum. And many of those choices come with dollars attached, the right courses that they have to take in the right sequence at the right time, whether or not they need to work or can work during those during the term or otherwise. And so the best colleges, what we found is that they don't leave the student to do that on their own. They're very proactive about supporting the student so that, again, a student, if they take a wrong turn, don't have to deal with sometimes the consequences, and in many cases a material consequence to an unguided choice. Next, interactions rooted in empathy must be supported by systems rooted in accuracy. So again, 200 hours worth of interviews. What we found is that advisors, mentors, faculty, they care about their students. They care deeply about their students. They empathize with their students. But what happens is that they don't always have the right information to guide them. And so it's incumbent upon the institutions to create systems that institutionalize the faculty, advisors, other mentors to students in having that right information. Because what we also found is that especially first generation students and students who do not know or might not have the support in navigating higher education at home, if they have a poor interaction with a support system, they might not come back. And so that's a lost opportunity on behalf of the institutions, which is why we've got to pair that caring with systems to ensure accuracy in our information. Next, grassroots efforts can produce strong and equitable outcomes, but those grassroots efforts are often subject to disruption, especially in the face of staff turnover or transitions. And so we found in some interviews and some screening calls really strong outcomes. And when we asked why those strong outcomes were the way they were for the period that we were looking at, a not uncommon refrain was, this person was working here and they did this and this and they were talking to these people. I don't really know where it stands right now because they left. And so we don't know whether the outcomes are consistent over time. And so again, yes, as an individual, as a small group of people putting in the grassroots efforts, you can make a difference. But if it's not institutionalized, again, it might have an expiration date. Finally, on the brighter side of things, grassroots programs are often the precursor to transformational change. So if you are one of those people that is pushing forward a grassroots efforts, what we found across the interviews that we conducted is that in the strongest performing partnerships, when leadership picked up on the great work that some of these grassroots programs were doing and the results that they were seeing, and they invested in them in order to institutionalize them, that's when we saw not just good outcomes, but sustainable transformational change. Okay, so with that in mind, we took some of these findings and observations and we started kind of asking questions of the strongest partnerships in the nation, and that helped us frame some of the findings that we saw in those places. And so this is the emerging practical guidance from our field work. Again, still in draft form, might look a little bit different when it comes out officially in October. But there are 4 parts to the practical framework. First and foremost, make transfer a president-level priority to achieve sustainable success at scale. Again, grassroots efforts, they're great. They can produce strong outcomes for students, but they're not institutionalized and in many cases aren't sustainable over the long run. Second, create programmatic pathways to timely bachelor's completion and postgraduate success. And it's that to timely bachelor's completion and postgraduate success. That is really important. You saw in the data that Tati had shared, 18% of transfer students to four-year institutions are completing within 2 years of transferring. And it's worse for Black students and low-income students and Hispanic students. And so again, how do we construct our systems to enable timely completion? Third, aligning instruction and academic supports to timely bachelor success within a major. And then finally, tailored transfer advising and supports to foster trust, momentum, and engagement. Again, many advisors, very caring, support service staff, very caring, but how do we make sure that we have the systems in place so that it's not just about individuals who care? We have a system that supports those caring individuals in delivering the best support possible in a systematic and scaled way. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive in what each of the components of the practical framework include. So make transfer a president level priority. There are 3 features of this strategy. First and foremost, multi-level, well-resourced partnerships. What does that look like? A president-led vision for impact, clearly communicated with external and internal stakeholders, again, to begin institutionalizing this as a priority. Or to continue institutionalizing it as a priority. Cabinet-sponsored governance structures that span both institutions. Again, it's separate this is distinct from a single individual owning transfer or moving transfer student success forward on their own. Third, individual and shared investment between the community college and the four-year institution, a feature of these really strong partnerships. And that kind of investment really included funding, in particular for financial aid, space, and also dedicated staff to support students across the partnership. And then finally, collaboration both within and between partner institutions or clusters of institutions. I think when we think about the transfer student experience, there are very few corners of the institution that transfer students wouldn't touch. So it's really crucial to have that collaboration both within and between institutions, again, to support to the point of the third feature, which is an end-to-end redesign of the full transfer student experience. So what we found is that, in comparison to what most institutions do, most institutions are focused on credit transfer or mobility and recruitment. The strongest partnerships that we were looking at were really focused on models that extended beyond that. They were developing strategies that were tailored to regional needs. Again, place matters. So they were looking at the workforce needs of their regions, the needs of their students for their student demographics, and looking at strategies in their transfer student experience that would meet them. All of them across the board paid special attention to affordability and financial aid. We did, as part of our site visits, focus groups with students at all of the sites, and there wasn't a single student who didn't mention affordability and financial aid as being top of mind. In many cases, it was the reason that they decided to pursue the transfer pathway, because in theory, if it's working well, then you would be able to save in terms of tuition costs and other costs to complete your bachelor's degree. And so the models for these institutions or transfer experiences really took that into consideration and invested in financial aid where possible. And then finally, and any student could be a transfer student mentality. When we wait for students to raise their hand to say, I'm a transfer student, we're already introducing inequities into the system. And so what a lot of these partnerships and institutions did was cultivate the interest in transfer and make sure that it wasn't that it wasn't an accident that a student was able to come across a mentor that said, you would be a good fit for this, or have you thought of this? It was embedded in their systems that all students from the very outset of their engagement would be thinking about whether or not transfer could be right for them and what the possibilities were for them. And then finally, this one is one of my personal favorites, but it's a little dry and maybe some people might consider it a little boring, but transfer student standard operating procedure, transfer student centered standard operating procedures. And the reason that I like this one so much is because it is a sign that it has been institutionalized. It's not living with one person to do credit evaluation fairly, right? There's a particular system, there's a particular protocol that enables that for all students. And so some examples of this are that we saw in the field were disaggregated data reporting for accountability, case making, and continuous improvement, and having the venues to share that data across partners. Automation and predictable processes to streamline student experiences, whether that's the application process, credit evaluation, even alignment of learning management systems to, again, smoothen the transfer student experience. And then this one's really important, recurring mechanisms to assess students' perspectives. A lot of the strong partnerships were doing student focus groups and surveys in order to, again, make sure that their strategies were resonating with students and really making an impact and serving their needs. And Donna, I want to invite, I haven't been monitoring the chat, so if there are questions that come up that are pertinent in the moment, feel free to interrupt me. I'm happy to address them as we move along.
Sure. Yeah, I would say go ahead and finish. We have a few, and I see Tati's in here responding to a couple. So we have requests to review a couple of things, but I would say go ahead and finish.
Okay, great. So the second part of the framework is creating programmatic pathways to timely bachelor's completion and postgraduate success. 3 features of this strategy: 4-year maps. What we mean by 4-year maps are clear term-by-term 4-year plans within a major. And what really set the partnerships apart with their maps is that the 4-year maps is that they set the expectation for timely completion, but they are adjustable. They said, these are the courses that you need in order to complete in 4 years, but they're adjustable for part-time students. And in order to have a 4-year map, it needs to be built for no excess credit. That means that there has to be credit applicability, not just transferability when you're looking at it across the bachelor's completion and not just associate degree completion, which when we do see a lot of maps in the field, a lot of them just go to associate degree completion, which don't always require credit applicability. And what the strong partnerships did as well, again, place matters. They would link those maps to family sustaining careers in the service areas. Again, first generation students, low income students, Black Hispanic students sometimes don't know about the options that bachelor's degrees provide. They made the implicit explicit, and by putting it on the map, and it helped both students and advisors in navigating conversations. Second feature, sequences that promote learning in major success. So what goes in the 4-year map is really important to support a strong transfer student experience. They embed relevant math and English in the first year. That is, as the research shows, it's a momentum builder. If you can complete college level math and English in the first year, you're much more likely to be on track to transfer. Front load courses that inspire early major changes or commitment. And so this is a departure from conventional wisdom that says, get your gen eds out of the way. What the strongest partnerships were doing by front loading those courses were inspiring early major exploration. And if a student realized, oh, I actually don't like engineering, then they could move without as much consequence in terms of time to degree. Expect at least one major specific course each term in community college. In our fieldwork, we've looked at dozens and dozens of maps. And unfortunately, a common refrain, and this is a real example, is a biology major might only take 2 biology classes in their entire experience in community college. So when we think about inequities for transfer students, that is a major one. They're not on the same footing as a student who would have started at the 4-year institution and majoring in biology. So you look at the data that Tati shared, and those kinds of structures begin to explain some of the outcomes that we see in the data. And again, making the implicit explicit by linking the sequences to high impact experiences and finances that, some, especially first generation students, might not think about in terms of an internship or research that they could do to complement the course sequences. And this is really important, this last feature, systematized translation of maps into individualized education plans. So you have the 4-year map, which is the ideal state, right? Especially for full-time students. But as we know, a lot of community college students are part-time. And so what the best colleges were doing, in particular through their advising systems, were supporting students in creating plans that balanced their timely completion and work and family responsibilities. And they made an expectation for the institution that the plans were developed within the first term or year. So again, students had a sense of direction of where they were going. And while a popular solution to support timely progression, especially for students who couldn't take a full course load in any given term, was to use summer to support timely progression for transfer students and ensuring that aid enabled them to be able to do that. Okay, the two more. Align instruction and academic supports to timely bachelor success within a major. So three features of this strategy: regular faculty engagement and transfer efforts. You can't get the four-year maps if you don't engage faculty. And what that looked like was creating venues for routine pathway development. So bringing faculty within a discipline together to develop those pathways, but making sure that it wasn't one and done. These colleges had these faculty convenings year after year to maintain those pathways. But what those conversations evolved in were not mapping conversations per se. They really evolved into curricular and instructional alignment between the community college faculty and the four-year faculty. And so again, moving beyond mapping to making sure that students are having the learning experiences they need to thrive. Second, establishing transfer inclusive program review at partner institutions, like making sure that the curriculum and the courses are considering transfer student outcomes, embedding transfer student outcomes into that program review so you're understanding how students are doing both at the two-year and the four-year institution. And then another role for faculty, using maps to support, using maps and individualized education plans to support transfer inclusive scheduling. So if you know when students are going to be progressing through those maps, can you make sure course availability is there for them so that they can actually progress through the map? It's not just a theoretical state. Rigorous instruction and advanced pedagogy with academic support. So moving into the classroom now, what we saw at these sites was that they held high expectations for students, high rigor in courses, in particular in gateway courses, but every single one of them embedded bolstered the classroom experience with academic supports, in particular the use of writing centers and tutoring. And so that enabled the faculty at both the community college and the four-year institutions to teach to university level success within a major for transfer students. They also, this is more for community college faculty, but reformed developmental education to establish quick on-ramps to college or transfer level, especially math and English courses. And then there were always instances where the course offerings at community college in a particular major and the course offerings at a four-year institution weren't going to overlap entirely. But it wasn't enough. For instance, it would be 75% of a course would be covered by the community college, but they couldn't get that last 25%. So it wasn't really enough to say, sorry, student, you have to take this whole course all over again. What they did instead was get creative, made good use of summer and boot camps to enable the student to get up to speed on things without having to take a whole course over again. And again, that just builds trust with students. If a student ends up in a course and 75% is the same that they took at a community college, doesn't build good rapport with the institution. Third, transfer inclusive professional development, a little bit different than the faculty engagement in that, informal faculty professional development processes, in particular for new faculty, making clear that transfer students are serving transfer students is a critical part of the mission, and embedded within that, making the case with qualitative and quantitative data in faculty senate meetings and departmental meetings to build those transfer champions within the faculty who can then participate in regular faculty engagement and transfer efforts, for example. Last one, tailored transfer advising and supports to foster trust, momentum, and engagement. So we talked about the translation of the maps into individualized education plans, and those are predominantly done between advisors and students. But what is crucial to ensure that is systematized is that you have a trained, knowledgeable, and caring advising corps. So what does that look like, or what did that look like at these top sites? Investments in mandatory, routine, transfer-specific professional development. There were some places that closed down advising offices every Friday or every 2 weeks in order to make sure that all of their advisors knew this is what's happening in transfer. And they went through specific protocols. So advising protocols that started with students' career goals in mind in order to support major pathway selection early, and then individualized education plan development. Protocols that address how to navigate individualized education plans, redirection in the plans if they switched majors, for instance, and the use of academic and non-academic supports. So that's what the advisors were learning in those mandatory and routine PD opportunities. But in terms of the caring advising core, the institutions were really deliberate about hiring and training advisors in order to facilitate that empathy. So, for instance, many of the schools had hired advisors that were transfer students themselves, or reflect the regional or local population so that students felt comfortable approaching those advisors for help, and supported that vulnerability and relationship building that was necessary in order to support their progression through their plans. Second feature of the strategy, an inescapable, omnipresent advising campaign. Again, this is really related to equity. So if we just have an advising shop and expect students to come to the advising shop, there's going to be inequities introduced into that system. What we found at these top sites was that they were proactive in high schools, community colleges, four-year institutions, constantly building the aspiration of students to transfer. Some students didn't want to, even after being provided the information, and that's fine. But it's a conscious and informed choice. They made sure that their advising systems were available through both in-person and virtual formats, and beyond your typical 9 to 5 hours. Some of them, extended to 6 or 6:30, 7 p.m. to accommodate especially working and parenting students. And the systems that they developed kind of had inevitable that multimodal engagement throughout community college, university admissions, orientation, and onboarding. So orientation can be a form of advising, onboarding can be a form of advising. And so how do you embed that throughout? And then finally, a transfer-specific approach to holistic success. So quick on-ramps to career advising and high-impact experiences in both community college and university. So being very intentional about that, again, to make the implicit explicit. Activities that foster community building, belonging, and inclusion informed by transfer student demographics and needs. In many cases, orientation, advising, and onboarding of transfer students is hyper-focused on course selection. It needs to be in some cases, but the best partnerships were focused on building community amongst transfer students as well. And you could see that in the transfer student focus groups, is that they really appreciated that, and it helped them build that connection to the institution and help them complete. Attention to transfer students' financial and material needs, including through dedicated grants, financial aid advising, and campus resources focused on basic needs. Transfer students, community college students, about 2/3 of them are coming from the lower half of the income distribution. So it's particularly relevant for this particular student group in order to meet their material needs so that they can progress academically. So the last thing that I wanted to share with you is just some examples of the end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience, which is really I think it is the hallmark of some of these of the high-performing partnerships, these models that extend beyond credit mobility or recruitment, and that are tailored to regional needs. And so have a few examples here from both the playbook research as well as our other field work. But some of the transformational models and their example elements are, for instance, starting in high school. So Imperial Valley College in Imperial Valley, California, I think it's one of the cold vegetable capitals of the world. So a lot of your vegetables during the winter time would come from Imperial Valley. High school seniors work to complete an IVC application and a FAFSA. They develop with a counselor, and they develop they not only do the application in the fall, but with the college counselor in the spring of senior year. For those who are admitted, they start their educational plan that links to transfer. So it's not just about admission for Imperial Valley and their partner, San Diego State University. It's about program onboarding and degree progression. And they also supplement that with dual enrollment. Simplifying admissions. One local example to you is the CUNY Justice Academy between John Jay College of Criminal Justice and 6 CUNY community colleges. And one of the things that stood out to us about this example was that for a set of majors that are part of the Justice Academy, it's automatic enrollment. So remember, any student can be a transfer student mentality. If you are in this major, you have automatic enrollment in CGA and that results in guaranteed admission to John Jay upon associate degree completion. It takes out all the guesswork. And it's incredibly equitable because it says any student in this major could be a transfer student. Again, not waiting to raise people's hands. Guaranteeing affordability. Mason and through their partnership with Northern Virginia Community College Advance, they have the Mason Virginia Promise, which is a last dollar scholarship that covers tuition and fees, again, addressing transfer student financial needs. Arkansas Transfer Achievement Scholarship. So associate degree completers at the community college will pay the same rate at a U of A four-year campus if they transfer. I think it's within a term or a year of completing their associate degree. Again, it removes the mental and the financial barrier that, can I afford the four-year institution? Linking transfer to careers, Virginia Commonwealth University's Mellon Pathways to the Arts and Humanities and HHMI STEM Pathways. So again, embedding that career exploration, those high impact experiences, that mentoring into the pathway. And VCU does that both for humanities and STEM students. And then finally, developing local talent. There's an example from Lorain Community College here. Again, a more rural institution or community college, four-year institutions a little further afield. They have a center on Lorain's campus that houses university partners that deliver advising and interactive distance learning. And another flavor of that is the bachelor's through online and local degrees at Shasta College in California, where Shasta transfers to online university programs are then co-enrolled into a one-credit course at Shasta. And what that enables those students to do is to use Shasta facilities, and it creates a kind of a de facto cohort of students. They can use the computers, the libraries, and the eligible majors meet workforce needs. And so they've seen that program grow by 10 times since they started. Again, a very rural area. It's still brand new, but really promising, again, to connect students who might not have the opportunity to complete a bachelor's degree. And as Tati said, those predominantly online institutions typically having much lower outcomes. So Shasta is trying to overcome that through this model. All right, those are just some things to think about the end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience. My hope is that the best is yet to come. You've seen the outcomes nationally, and I hope that you all are going to come up with some of the best ideas that maybe one day will be up on this slide. All right, we've got, sorry, it wasn't very long, but 10 minutes to address your questions. I'll stop sharing our screen.
Thank you, Tania and Tatiana, very much. So we had one question in the chat, and Tati, you already responded. We have one question from Jacqueline, just to understand one of the slides that Tati presented on the time to completion. Could you just kind of go over that one more time, and then we'll take a couple of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the transferring bachelor completion rate, so for the four-year institutions. So what we do with this data is that we are focusing on the community college students who started at a four-year institution in the fall of 2015. How do we know that they are community college students? Because we are able to track their enrollments prior to that fall of 2015 up to 10 years, and we narrow it down to community college, to students who were enrolled at a community college within 6 years prior to that fall of 2015, and their last enrollment was at a community college. So that's kind of like where we're starting in terms of the time to degree prior to measuring these metrics that we have here. Now, for these students that we know were at a community college prior to their start at the four-year institution, we examine their term-to-term enrollments and examine their award completion 2 years after that fall of 2015 when they transferred, And that's the within 2 years metric that you observe. So that 18% means 18% of the community college transfers who started at a four-year institution in the fall of 2015 completed a bachelor's after 2 years of their transferring. So that would be 2016, 2017, okay? And then we expand that post-transfer window to 4 years and to 6 years. So we really are kind of like agnostic regarding how many years they spend at the community college, but rather we focus on how many years they spend after they transfer at the four-year institution.
And then we have a follow-up question about whether or not this data looks, for example, Tati, at comprehensive colleges that might offer institutions that offer the associate and the bachelor's degree, or is this only community college students who then transfer to a separate institution? Would you pick up any internal transfers?
That's a good question. So we are focusing on students who transfer to a different institution, to a four-year institution. We do that for two reasons. Basically, that's the transfer definition that we are focusing on. But when we look at the percentage of community college students who completed a bachelor's at a community college, for this specific cohort of students, so 2015, which is a fairly old cohort, there aren't a lot of students who are completing bachelor's at community colleges just yet. If my memory is not failing me, it's less than 4% of all the students. It was a really small rate that wasn't really consequential in terms of our measurement of bachelor completion through transfer. Now, we know that in states like California and other places, community college are increasingly starting to grant bachelor degrees. So that's something that future transfer research will have to consider.
Great. Yes, within SUNY, and it's the same within CUNY, we have a subset of colleges that wouldn't be considered community colleges. They would be comprehensive colleges that offer both the associate's and the bachelor's degree. But your point is well taken that this is still a subset of the broader population across the United States of students who begin in associate degrees who overwhelmingly are at community colleges, which is obviously the focus of this work. Let's open it up to some questions from the group. If anybody wants to come off mute in these last couple of minutes, just to ask some questions of our guests. This is such an incredibly rich body of research, and the findings that you've been able to glean from some of these examples across the country, some of which I personally know. I know the good folks at Shasta who are doing BOLD, and obviously the folks in CUNY that are doing the Justice Academy, but love to hear from some of our SUNY colleagues. Some questions for Tania and Tatiana. I'm scanning the room to see if anybody wants to come off mute to ask a question or pose a comment. So among, just as a reminder, through our transformation fund, 20 campuses raised their hands to use some of their funds right out of the gate on multi-campus transfer partnerships. And then through an additional funding stream, we have a total of 38 campuses who are involved in partnerships in some way. Is there anyone on this call that would just like to talk about kind of something that in particular that might have resonated from what Tania or Tatiana shared? I was particularly interested in this notion of kind of faculty collaboration and thinking kind of end to end about the advisement work. So I'd love to hear from anyone who might have any thoughts or comments about those dimensions in particular.
I can comment on that, Donna.
Yeah, absolutely.
Karen Moniata. Hi, Tania. How are you? Good to see you again. It was the body of information you just provided us. It was just amazing, and thank you for that. I'm very familiar with the old transfer playbook. I'm doing a lot of work with our transfer partnership programs that we've established this past year, and we are in fact planning a session with our partners, with the faculty and some of the administration. We're hoping to bring them all to our campus in October, in late October, for that exact reason of the conversations that need to happen between faculty and faculty to bring the programs on into alignment, but beyond that. So I was excited to hear that you were speaking of that and that is in our plan. And you really provided us with quite a bit to think about. And I had many ideas, and I may now be changing my ATI RFP based on some of the thoughts that we have today. So thank you so much.
Thomas.
There we go. Thank you very much. I was actually at the transfer conference in St. Louis and got to see you guys talk as well. And so thank you. Donna, based on just what you said, is that connection between community college and coming to the four-year and the variety of needs and the variety of onboarding that's needed, that it can't really be like one thing. That's kind of where we've been trying to focus our funds and our time, with getting more of our staff onto the community colleges, our partners, which is so much harder said. Like, it's easier said than done. Like, sometimes, like, getting like a quality program in one place to help with the other, but just the reaching out and the communication with our new existing partners. But in this context, the amount of communication has increased so much, and understanding the needs of the different feeder schools and the different community college partners that we have has been really positive. And a lot of the stuff that I brought back from that conference has been really helpful. So thank you both very much.
That's great. I'm just scanning the room to see if there's anybody else who has any final thoughts. So I believe my colleague Tom Hannaford is on here. So as folks, oh, Erin, I see you've got your hand up. Go for it.
Thank you. So excited. All of this information is really powerful at a moment when it's great that we have these intentional funds, and certainly sparked some new things in my mind today. And I'm meeting with Marilyn Zagora from Jamestown right after this today in our regular standing meetings. And I think that we haven't really thought about what's the excellent work of some of our other partners today that you pointed out with CUNY and John Jay, and that definitely criminal justice path, and how well those specific, it doesn't have to be everything. I think we think about how do we serve every single transfer, but if we can see some great ways to move obstacles or create ways to onboard that others can model down the way, if we can get one program started in that direction, right? Thinking about that small one, how great that can snowball quickly is exciting to me. And for us to think about how can we model something similar between our Fredonia campus and our JCC partner, which we can pretty much see each other from here, would be really great to move that obstacle of automatic. How do we make things more automatic and have that small win? So thanks for the very concrete, very specific examples today. I'm sure they sparked lots of intentional ideas with many of us having these conversations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Erin. I just wanted to also just give Tom, my colleague, Tom Hannaford, a chance to say a few words. As folks probably know, we've been running a transfer task force across the entire system that has representation from all sectors with more than 100 people, President's Advisory Committee. We're starting to synthesize the findings from that, which resonate really well with some of the information that Tania kind of led us through. But the idea of kind of this regional partnerships, intentionality, automated, anything that can be systematized and made more standard, and from the earliest possible inception, that really resonated with so much of the recommendations that we're going to be synthesizing in our report. So it's very gratifying for me, particularly, to hear from folks as experienced as Tania and Tatiana, that what they found from their multi-year research is a set of recommendations that we really need to be moving towards. Tom, do you want to come off mute and just say anything in conclusion?
Well, I mean, I think you just said a lot of the things that I would have said. I mean, I should note that some of the very specific recommendations and some of especially some of the core strategies that are present in the report from the CCRC were specifically cited as things that we would like to adopt and socialize across the SUNY system. So I think that this report and the work that our subgroups and our transfer task force on the whole have done aligns, and I'm grateful for you spending the time today to remind us of the research.
So if I could just take a minute to thank Tania and Tatiana for spending the last hour with us. We're incredibly grateful to both of you. We're grateful to all of our partners from across the system who joined us today. Great questions. With your permission, of course, we'd love to share your deck. We have kind of a portal that we push things out through, and are very excited to see the report that you mentioned would be coming out in October. So if we could all just give our guests a round of applause, and to yourself as well. And as with the last community of practice, we will be posting this recording. If you have colleagues that were unable to join you, please share the recording, and again, with permission, we'll also share a PDF of the deck. So thank you very much. Tania and Tatiana, any final words you have for us?
Just thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of your work, and please share it back with us. Would love to hear if you've adopted any of the recommendations.
Most definitely. All right. So thank you everyone for staying a couple of extra minutes. Wishing everyone a fabulous day. Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you.